Have you ever heard of a disappearance so strange, so meticulously erased, that even time seemed to forget it happened? In the summer of 1999, a group of young researchers vanished deep in the Nevada desert after reporting a mysterious signal unlike anything Earth had ever known. No crash, no distress call, no trace. For 19 years, their story was buried, until a freak tremor in 2018 unearthed something no one was prepared to see. A buried structure humming with energy, data, and something that felt almost human. What happened during those missing years? Why did time seem to bend around them? And who, or what, was waiting on the other side of silence? This is not just a story about a disappearance. It's a revelation. One that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about memory, connection, and the secrets the desert was never meant to share. Stay with us. What you're about to witness will change you. In the brutal heat of the Nevada sun, the land seemed lifeless. Just jagged rocks, dust devils dancing across the sand, and that peculiar silence you only get when something has long been buried. 19 years. That's how long the Mojave Desert kept its secret. For nearly 2 decades, no one had any reason to glance at the cracked ridge just west of Redwater Canyon. But on a dry June morning in 2018, during what was supposed to be a routine geological survey funded by the University of Arizona, the drone's camera captured something strange, a warped metal glint wedged between rocks, half submerged by time and sand. No one thought much of it until an engineer enhanced the image and someone whispered a single word: Camden. That name was enough to send chills down the spine of anyone who still remembered the case. In 1999, 5 promising engineering students from Caltech, Jared Camden, Reggie Moore, Tanya El Sayed, Miguel Santos, and Marilyn Lake, vanished during a spring break expedition meant to test a solar-powered terrain vehicle of their own design. The last known satellite ping from their tracker came from just beyond Redwater. Then, nothing. No bodies, no wreckage, no signals. Just an eerie, absolute silence that swallowed not only them, but any trace they had existed beyond newspaper clippings and devastated families. Over time, theories spiraled into legend: a cartel ambush, a military experiment gone wrong, even alien abduction. But there had never been closure, until now. When the drone feed was reviewed and triangulated, the university team notified local law enforcement, who quickly sealed off the area. But the truth didn't stay buried for long. Within 48 hours, a shadowy group from an unnamed federal agency took over the site. The lead geologist who first reported the anomaly, Dr. Ian Heller, was placed under a non-disclosure order. All communications were scrubbed, and for a second time, the desert was told to keep quiet. Except one person couldn't forget. In Portland, Oregon, a woman named Marilyn Lake stirred in her sleep. Her dreams, no, her memories, were fragmented but vivid. A flash of static on a radio. Screaming. A man with one blue eye. A metallic door slamming shut. She hadn't spoken of that trip in years, had buried it so deep even her therapist thought she was exaggerating. But now, something inside her cracked open. Because the truth was, she had survived. She was the only one who had made it out of Redwater Canyon alive in 1999. But what haunted her more than anything wasn't what she remembered. It was what she'd been forced to forget. Her name hadn't appeared in the headlines back then because her father, a powerful defense contractor, had pulled strings to suppress her identity. The media thought 5 kids had vanished, but there had been 6, and one of them had come back broken, amnesiac, and quietly erased. Marilyn now lived under a new name, working as a systems analyst in a tech firm, hiding in plain sight. But when she received a coded message in the mail, a photo of the Redwater Ridge with one handwritten line beneath, "It's waking up," she knew it had begun again. She stared at the photo, the sweat on her palms soaking through the paper, and dialed a number she hadn't called in 19 years. It rang twice before a voice answered, calm, measured, and unmistakably military. "Miss Lake, I was expecting you." Her breath hitched. "They found it, didn't they?" A long pause. "Not all of it, but enough. We need you in Nevada, now." Marilyn's knees buckled slightly. For 19 years, she had tried to convince herself it was a hallucination, a breakdown, or trauma-induced fiction. But deep down, she always knew Redwater had not been empty. And now, the desert was giving back its dead, or worse, what was left of them. She packed lightly. One duffel, a photograph of the group before the trip, and a small black device she hadn't dared activate in almost 2 decades. As her plane lifted off toward Las Vegas, Marilyn looked out the window, not at the view, but at her reflection. Older, sharper, but inside, still haunted. If the others had survived, why hadn't they reached out? If they hadn't, what exactly had she escaped from? The truth wasn't just buried in the desert. It had been designed to stay hidden. But secrets have a way of clawing themselves to the surface. And this one had been waiting since 1999. The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged line of the Sierra Nevada range when Marilyn stepped out of the small Cessna plane onto a dusty, makeshift airstrip 30 miles from Redwater Canyon. The air smelled of gasoline, sand, and that unmistakable stillness she hadn't felt since 1999. The silence of a place trying to forget. Waiting for her was a black SUV, idling with tinted windows. A man in desert fatigue stepped out, his features sharp and weathered, a faint scar running down the side of his neck. "Agent Cole," he said curtly, not offering a handshake, "I'm here to escort you to the site." She didn't respond, just climbed into the back seat and buckled up. As the vehicle rumbled through dirt paths and forgotten terrain, memories returned uninvited. Jared's laugh echoing against the canyon walls. Reggie tuning the satellite radio with grease-stained hands. Tanya, always scribbling notes even as the solar rover got stuck in the sand. Miguel arguing with the GPS module. And then, blackness. Screams, metal, cold. Something that didn't fit the desert. Something ancient or too advanced. She shook her head. "Don't trust your memory," her therapist had always said. But what if the memories weren't wrong? What if they had been forcibly stripped away? "Did they find the rover?" Marilyn finally asked, her voice hoarse. Agent Cole didn't turn. "We found a structure, a partial one. Nothing that matches standard aerospace debris. It's made of an alloy we haven't cataloged. It's not eroded, 19 years in that environment, and it looks freshly minted. And the others?" A pause. No bodies, no bones, just... He handed her a tablet. On it was a photo, the inside of a shallow sandstone ravine, and at the base, 5 perfect impressions in the dirt. Not just footprints, body-shaped outlines. As if 5 people had once lain there, side by side, arms by their sides, and vanished. But that wasn't the worst of it. Above those impressions, scratched into the rock with something jagged and metallic, was a message. It simply read, "6 came, 1 left, find her." Marilyn felt her throat tighten. Her hands trembled as she turned the tablet back toward Cole. "Who else knows?" "Just a need-to-know team. Forensics is on rotation every 4 hours. We're rotating shifts to minimize leaks. But the higher-ups are nervous. The composition of the structure matches nothing we've encountered. It reflects EM waves in a frequency used only in experimental Cold War transmissions. But the real kicker," he tapped the screen again. A second photo appeared. Deep under the sandstone, they had discovered what looked like a sealed chamber door. On its surface, faint etchings. Scientific diagrams, maybe. Or a language. Something not meant for surface eyes. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "To remember," Cole said simply. "We believe something happened in 1999 that wasn't just disappearance. Something someone wanted to erase from your mind. But the trigger, whatever kept it locked, seems to be failing. You're our key now." The SUV slowed. They had arrived. Beyond the makeshift perimeter, tents and mobile labs buzzed with silent urgency. But Marilyn wasn't looking at the people. She was looking at the rocks, the familiar formations, the towering spires of sandstone, like crooked fingers pointing to a merciless sky. It was all exactly the same, and completely wrong, because the canyon she remembered had felt small, almost claustrophobic. But this, it looked wider now, changed. "That's not possible," she murmured. "No tectonic activity has occurred here in years," Cole confirmed, "but ground-penetrating radar suggests the land underneath shifted recently, as if something moved below." Marilyn stepped out, her boots hitting sand with a dull thud. Every step she took felt like walking into a graveyard, and yet, something inside her stirred. Not fear, a strange electric recognition, like part of her had been here yesterday, not 19 years ago. She walked toward the main excavation site, past blinking monitors and silent scientists who eyed her like a relic. And then, she saw it. The door. Half uncovered, the edge of its metallic surface gleamed under a tarp. A faint hum surrounded it, imperceptible to the others but painfully loud to her, a tone she couldn't place. And as she stood there, her pulse matching that quiet vibration, she whispered to herself, "They didn't leave. They were taken." The wind picked up, brushing sand over the impressions in the dirt. The message on the wall faded slightly as a gust swept through, but one part remained clear. Find her. Marilyn turned to Cole, her voice sharper now. "You said you only found 5 outlines." He nodded. "Yes, why?" She pointed to a 6th depression in the distance, faint but unmistakable. "Then, who made that one?" Agent Cole stared at the faint 6th impression in the sand, brows knitting as Marilyn stepped closer, crouching beside it. Unlike the others, deep, defined, unmistakably human. This one was shallower, stretched at odd angles, and almost deliberate. "Was this here when your team arrived?" she asked, brushing her hand across the edge. "I don't know," Cole admitted. "We cleared this area 2 days ago, but sandstorms come through here fast. That impression could have been made in the last 48 hours or the last 19 years. Marilyn didn't reply. She simply looked up at the rock face above the outline. No new messages, no carvings. But the wind shifted again, and she caught something on the breeze. Not a sound. A scent. It was the sterile metallic tinge she'd once inhaled in sealed military hangars, or in a surgical chamber. "I need to see the chamber door," she said, standing up. "Now." Cole hesitated. "There's still debate on whether to open it." "You don't have time to debate," she snapped. "If that 6th outline is new, someone or something's been here. And if they're still watching, then waiting isn't going to save us." Minutes later, Marilyn stood before the partially uncovered metal door. The carvings were clearer now, a mix of mathematical symbols, atomic structures, and what looked like spirals radiating from a central point. She reached out, hesitating just inches from the cold surface, and the moment her fingertips hovered near, the door pulsed. Not physically, not visibly, but in her chest, something moved, like a tuning fork struck somewhere deep inside her ribcage. She staggered back. "What just happened?" Cole asked, alarmed. "It recognized me," she whispered. "I think it remembers me. Are you saying this thing is sentient?" "No," she said. "I'm saying it was programmed, or designed, to only respond to someone who's already been through it." The ground beneath her felt suddenly fragile. She turned to Cole. "I need you to bring me into the tent. I need privacy. And I need a neurological scanner. EEG, memory enhancement suite, the works." "That's not protocol," he said. "You want protocol?" she snapped. 19 years ago, you people buried the biggest anomaly in American history under a silence order. Your protocol lost 5 lives, erased mine, and locked whatever's behind that door for nearly 2 decades. You want answers? Let me remember. Cole didn't argue. He waved over a technician and barked orders. Within 20 minutes, Marilyn sat in a tent outfitted like a mobile psych lab. Electrodes lined her temples. A cooling gel itched along her scalp. She focused on the blinking cursor of the memory extraction software. "Begin auditory stimuli," the technician said. Over the speakers, faint white noise played. Then a faint beep. Then static. Then a low-frequency hum. Marilyn's eyes flew open. She gasped, her hands twitching as her head jerked. "Cut the audio!" the tech shouted. "Wait!" she cried. "Let it play!" And just like that, it all came flooding back. She was in the rover. Tanya was driving. Miguel was cursing about the solar array. Jared had just adjusted the frequency modulator. Then the sky had changed. No lightning, no storm, but the color of the air shifted, like reality itself folded. And then there was the sound. A mechanical tone that vibrated not through ears but bone. Jared's eyes rolled back. Tanya slumped. Reggie screamed. Marilyn had tried to run. She remembered that now. But the sand beneath her had opened like a trap, swallowing her into a tunnel of light. Her next memory was cold metal, a room with smooth black walls, and a voice, not speaking English, not any human language, but something her brain could interpret. "You are one of 6. 5 are suspended. 1 must carry the memory." Then she had woken up in a military hospital in San Diego, her name changed, her memory suppressed. The official story was dehydration-induced psychosis. Her father had arranged the rest. The machine beeped frantically now. The technician was yelling something, but she couldn't hear anymore, because outside a scream echoed across the desert. The tent flap burst open. A young soldier stood breathless. "Ma'am, agent, You need to come see this." Marilyn and Cole ran to the excavation site. Scientists were clustered in a ring around the sixth outline, now clearly pressed deeper, more defined. But the real horror wasn't in the sand. It was above it. Someone had etched a new message into the rock face. Not weathered like the others. This one was fresh. The stone flakes still clung to the letters. It read, "She remembers. We awake." Marilyn stepped back, her chest tight. "How could someone carve that in daylight without anyone noticing?" a scientist murmured. "Because," Cole said, his voice suddenly dry, "they're not outside." Marilyn turned to the door. The metal was glowing now, dimly, with a soft, pulsing light from within. Like a beacon, a signal, or a heartbeat. "It's calling me," she whispered. "No," Cole said, hand on his weapon. "It's opening." The door was no longer dormant. Under the dying light of the Nevada sun, it pulsed faintly like a living thing caught in the moment between rest and awakening. A hushed ripple of panic moved through the excavation camp as Marilyn stood face to face with the thing that had haunted her in fragments for 19 years. She didn't flinch, not even when the sand around the structure began to vibrate subtly, like breath exhaling from a long-buried lung. "What is it doing?" a young geophysicist asked, barely above a whisper. Cole had already drawn his sidearm, but he didn't lift it. What good was a gun against something they couldn't categorize, couldn't even define? "Stand down," Marilyn ordered quietly. Her voice had changed, not in tone, but in certainty. Something inside her had clicked. A recognition. Not of the door itself, but of her place in front of it. "This isn't an invasion," she said slowly. "It's a return protocol." "Return?" Cole echoed. "For who?" She looked over her shoulder at the sixth impression in the sand, now unmistakably fresh. "For the others." Without waiting for permission, Marilyn stepped toward the metallic surface, her fingertips brushing it once more. The pulse intensified, then steadied into a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to crawl up her arm and nestle behind her eyes. And then, without warning, the door began to retract. Not swing open, not slide, but dissolve, like mist shedding from steel. Behind it, a corridor revealed itself, pitch black, yet humming with invisible current. "Get back!" Cole barked to the rest of the team, but Marilyn had already crossed the threshold. The air inside was different. Thicker, but oddly breathable. No dust, no scent, just weight. As she walked, low glyphs along the walls lit up with her steps. Not in English or any human script, but with patterns she instinctively understood. Progress markers, perhaps, or memories. She wasn't alone. She knew it. Some presence walked beside her, just outside visible spectrum. Not threatening, just watching. At the end of the hallway was a chamber. A high dome rose above her, with 6 pillars in a perfect circle. At the center stood a column of swirling light, like a suspended liquid mirror. Within it, she saw faces. Jared's crooked grin, Tanya's inquisitive eyes, Miguel's anxious hands, Reggie's defiant scowl, and a fifth, one she didn't recognize, a woman, Asian American, mid-30s, wearing a uniform, military, civilian. Before Marilyn could process, a voice, not through sound, but through memory, filled her head. The 6 were marked, the 5 were held, the 1 was chosen. "Why me?" she whispered aloud. The light flickered, and in a swirl of motion, it transformed. A projection emerged, scenes from 1999, playing like reconstructed footage across the chamber wall. The rover, the anomaly, the storm of static, the bodies levitating, Marilyn running, the entity choosing her. Then the hospital, the erased files, the silence. "You built this," the voice whispered, and now it did sound like speech, but not human. Metallic, layered. Not in metal, in mind. You carried it, protected it, until recall was safe. "Safe for what?" she asked, almost breathless. "Integration." Suddenly alarms sounded from outside. Through the chamber walls, she could hear shouting, confusion, a rising pitch of terror. "Ma'am?" Cole's voice echoed from the corridor. "We've got a situation. Something just came through the northern perimeter. They're not showing up on thermal." "Don't shoot!" she yelled, running back toward the door. "Don't engage unless you're attacked." She emerged just as a second portal formed. Out in the sand, 20 feet from the dig site. It opened like an iris, swirling from the ground up. From it, 5 figures stumbled forward, dust-covered, weak, but undeniably human. and undeniably familiar. "Oh my God!" someone gasped. That's Jared," Marilyn said, rushing forward. He collapsed in her arms, eyes bloodshot and blinking in disbelief. "Mari?" he croaked. "How long?" "It's 2018, she whispered. 19 years. He stared at her, shaking. "It was only a few days, maybe a week. We thought you were dead." Around them, the others collapsed to their knees, gasping for air, clutching their chests. One was missing, the strange woman. "Where's the sixth?" Cole demanded. Jared looked around, confused. "There were only 5 of us," he said. "We never saw anyone else." "But the door said 6, Marilyn muttered. "It said 6 came." The ground trembled again. Everyone froze. And then, from beyond the canyon's rim, a new shape emerged. Tall, humanoid, but not fully human. Its skin glimmered with a metallic hue, its face partially obscured by a sleek visor-like surface. It didn't walk. It glided. "That's the 6th, Marilyn said. "She never left. She adapted." The being stopped several feet from them, raised one hand, and in perfect English said, "Protocol complete. Phase 2 begins." The being stood motionless, hands still raised, as if frozen in time, and for a brief moment, the entire canyon seemed to exhale. The scientists, soldiers, and Marilyn herself watched as the shimmer around the entity's form began to fade, revealing more of its face, delicate, distinctly feminine, but undeniably altered. This was no mask. Her skin, or what resembled it, was a seamless alloy of organic and synthetic strands, pulsating faintly with light from within. Her eyes were the color of scorched earth, but they moved with a depth that made every human gaze feel childlike in comparison. Jared struggled to sit upright, shielding his eyes from the glow. "She was there," he whispered, "in the void. Not with us, but around us. We heard her voice. Always asking questions? About Earth, about biology, about memory." Marilyn stepped forward cautiously, but the being didn't flinch. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice carrying across the desert air. The being's mouth moved, but the voice once again resonated inside every listener's head. "I was designated EVA 6, adaptation model. I was among you, but not of you. I was tasked to observe. I remained." Cole narrowed his eyes. "Who gave that task?" Eva 6 turned toward him, and for the first time, emotion flickered across her expression. Something like remorse. "The architects," she said. "They once seeded this world. They left traces. You found one in Redwater Canyon. That event in 1999, your contact with their system was not meant to occur, but your minds were compatible. It woke the node." "Node?" Marilyn asked. "The chamber," Eva 6 replied. "A dormant processing conduit, buried long before your species walked upright. You triggered it. It recognized your consciousness as evolutionary resonance. It needed calibration. That was phase 1. Jared coughed harshly, sand sticking to his lips. "You kept us there," he choked out, "trapped like test subjects." Eva 6 nodded once. "We preserved you, not to harm, to record, to understand why your species evolved unpredictably, why you diverged from other seeded lines. Your capacity for emotion, sacrifice, irrational defiance, these are anomalies, dangerous but necessary." The murmurs began among the scientists. Marilyn heard phrases like xenogenesis, post-contact evolution, and cognitive resonance fields. She didn't care. All she saw was a being who had lived 19 years among a frequency none of them could measure, learning every second. And now, standing before them, claiming it was only just beginning. "Phase 2 begins," Eva 6 said again, and this time the canyon trembled beneath their feet. At the excavation site, the once closed door behind Marilyn groaned. The symbols on its frame began glowing brighter, moving, rearranging as if decoding a message sent across millennia. "What is Phase 2? Cole demanded, lifting his gun again despite knowing how useless it was. Eva 6 didn't answer him directly. Instead, she turned to Marilyn. "You held the seed longer than the others. It chose you for continuity. You were never meant to return to ordinary life. You're the anchor now." "Anchor to what?" Marilyn breathed. "To the bridge," Eva 6 said. "You call it memory. But it is more. It is the ability to shape causality through emotional imprint. The architects learned this too late. Their own creations outgrew them. Now, they return." And then the sky changed. Not darkened, but warped. Like a thin layer of glass had cracked across the dome of the atmosphere. Technicians scrambled to grab instruments, only to find their devices going haywire. Compass needles spun. EM meters exploded with unreadable static. Satellites lost connection. "Ma'am!" someone shouted. "We're picking up a formation, thousands of feet wide, coming into low orbit. It's not a storm system. It's structured." "They've arrived," Eva 6 said, lowering her hand. "They seek to correct the divergence, but what they do not understand is, divergence is survival." The canyon's rock faces suddenly projected light. Images, memories, data, flashing so fast that even those who looked away felt them burning behind their eyes. Humanity's rise. War. Art. Sacrifice. Death. Rebirth. And something else. Visions of other species across other planets that did not make it. Beings with perfect logic, but no love. Civilizations with flawless order, but no chaos. All gone. Failed models. "You must choose," Eva 6 said, now directly to Marilyn. "Reveal the node to your world. Let your species integrate its knowledge and face what comes. Or bury it again. And let your world try to survive the return unprepared." "And what would happen if I integrated?" Marilyn asked, heart pounding. "Then you will cease to be what you were. You will become the first of something new. Not a hybrid. A bridge. And if I refuse? Then they will erase this canyon, all data, all life within 10 miles. It has happened before, in Tunguska, in Mohenjo-Daro, in the void where the Nazca spirals once glowed. The weight of it settled like lead in her lungs. She turned to Jared, to the team that had waited for her return, to the terrified agents and the buzzing instruments around her. "I came back to find answers," she whispered, "but the question was never about where we went. It was about what we became." She stepped toward the swirling light that had re-emerged behind Eva 6, its core now pulsating faster than before. "Then, let phase 2 begin with me." And she disappeared into the light. Marilyn's body didn't fall, didn't burn, didn't vanish. It shimmered, pixelating at the edges, refracted like sunlight caught in a droplet, and then she was simply gone, swallowed by the heart of the node, as the energy spiraled inward and the air folded around itself like origami in reverse. Onlookers gasped and fell back as the light intensified, yet no heat radiated from it, only vibration. Deep, harmonic, primordial, as if the earth itself was humming a note long forgotten. And then came silence, complete and total, not absence of sound, but the drowning of all frequency, as though even thought had been muted. The soldiers outside raised their weapons instinctively, though no enemy moved, while the scientists stared, their faces caught between awe and terror, as the node stopped spinning and began to breathe, contracting and expanding like a lung buried deep within the planet's crust, sinking to a rhythm ancient and unfamiliar. Suddenly, every piece of tech from smartwatches to satellites blinked in unison, screens flooding with geometric glyphs that rearranged themselves into patterns matching the ones carved into Redwater's stone walls. Back in the control tent, Agent Cole tried contacting command, but the comms were dead. No signal, no satellite lock, nothing above them but a vibrating sky. Inside the node, Marilyn stood, somehow whole, her body suspended in an amber field of light, eyes wide but calm, not panicked. And around her, projections of herself at various ages blinked into being like constellations. Her as a child clutching a telescope, her laughing in college with Jared, her after the trauma of 1999, broken and sedated. These fragments didn't frighten her. They flowed around her like a river of memory, and then they began to speak in her own voice, overlapping in cadence but harmonized in tone. "We are resonance. We are pattern. We are bridge," they intoned. And Marilyn felt something inside her unlock, a pressure valve releasing behind her eyes, as knowledge, not facts but understanding, flooded her mind. She saw the origin of the architects, not as gods or monsters, but as beings desperate to preserve the spark of self-awareness through engineered evolution. She saw that Earth wasn't the first nor the last planet seeded, merely the one where chaos had survived long enough to birth empathy. She understood now why the node had chosen her. Not because she was brilliant, but because she had broken and still rebuilt herself, without blueprint or code, purely on faith and emotional gravity. "You are the fulcrum," said a final echo of her own voice, and then her body convulsed, not in pain, but in fusion. every cell suddenly aware of its placement in the galactic web of cause and effect. On the canyon floor, the others watched as the light collapsed inward with a thunderless shockwave, then exploded upward into a spiral of data shooting toward the sky, punching through cloud cover and forming a corona visible from 3 neighboring states. And then Marilyn reappeared, standing at the base of the node, eyes glowing faintly, skin unchanged but perception clearly augmented. She looked at Jared, and though her lips didn't move, he heard her voice clearly inside his mind. "I remember everything now." Ava 6 approached her, bowed slightly, not as a servant but as a signal, an older intelligence yielding to a new convergence point, and the other researchers knelt instinctively, overwhelmed by the palpable shift in energy. "What did you see?" Cole asked, his voice cracking despite himself, and Marilyn turned to him slowly, replying with words this time, soft and clear. "I saw that we were never alone, not in space, not in time, not even within ourselves, and that the greatest threat we face is not invasion, but forgetting who we are." She walked toward the command tent, passing through a dozen shell-shocked scientists, each silently stepping aside. Reaching the main console, she placed her hand on the surface, and instantly the system rebooted, not just locally but globally, initiating a frequency handshake with hidden infrastructure buried across continents, remnants of other nodes long dormant. Around the world, ancient structures from Angkor Wat to Machu Picchu to deep-sea anomalies began pulsing faintly, as if reawakened by a synchronizing signal broadcast through the living antenna that was now Marilyn. "The architects are returning," she said flatly, "but not all of them agree on what to do with us." Jared stepped forward, clutching the old group photo from 1999, now stained and creased, holding it up toward her. "Do the others live?" he asked, and Marilyn hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Some, but they are changed." "Changed how?" Reggie muttered from behind, arms still wrapped in thermal foil. Marilyn didn't answer in words. She closed her eyes, and from the node's surface, 4 beams of light shot out, landing in distant coordinates. On screens nearby, blurred figures appeared, one in Siberia, another in Namibia, a third in Greenland, and the last on a forgotten island in Micronesia. All visibly altered, all looking skyward, aware they were being seen. "They are like me now," Marilyn whispered, "but with different truths, different integrations." A long pause followed before she added, "And some of them may not agree with what happens next." The wind shifted across Redwater, the dust rising in spirals, as if mimicking the unseen data currents now swirling through the atmosphere. Far above, something massive cast a faint shadow over the canyon, visible only for a heartbeat, a shape not built for human eyes, a ship or construct or entity watching. Marilyn turned to Ava 6 and said, "Tell them I'm ready, let Phase 3 begin." And with that, the ground began to hum again. The hum grew deeper as Marilyn stepped back from the node, her bare feet touching the stone that now throbbed with pulses of memory far older than any civilization. And she closed her eyes for a moment, not in fear, but in calibration. Because her mind now carried more than one voice, more than one truth. And some of those truths were bleeding through her veins like signals from distant stars demanding acknowledgement. The others, Jared, Reggie, Doctor, Heller, and Agent Cole, stood frozen, not from paralysis, but from awe, trying to comprehend whether the woman in front of them was still fully human or something humanity had never seen before. Then the node emitted a long, sharp tone, one that bypassed hearing and burrowed directly into the temporal lobe, followed by a holographic rupture above the canyon, a rippling vision that formed into 4 spectral figures, projections of the other survivors. Tanya in the ice fields of Greenland, her skin laced with crystalline fractals that refracted thought into light. Miguel embedded in the dunes of Namibia, cloaked in heat and dust, eyes blazing like solar cores. Reggie's sister, Elia, thought long dead, standing in a biomechanical suit atop an overgrown ruin in the Pacific, speaking an alien dialect that came across as symphonic chords. And Jared's own reflection, warped and floating in zero gravity, broadcasting from an orbiting anomaly above Earth. Wearing a face both familiar and unnervingly devoid of time, each survivor had not just endured, but adapted, having fused with fragments of the dormant architect technology scattered across the globe. Marilyn now understood that the 1999 disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a selection, a calling, and that they had been chosen not as sacrifices, but as seeds to awaken the sleeping fragments of a forgotten civilization engineered to test whether humanity had matured enough to inherit something far greater than Earth itself. The node connected them like synapses, and in that moment they began to speak, not with words, but with encoded memory flashes that only Marilyn could interpret fully. Tanya relayed the memory of touching an ancient lens that showed her every war humanity had fought, ending with a silence that asked, "Would you still fight to keep peace?" Miguel broadcast an imprint of biomechanical organisms regenerating from nothing, asking, "Do you still believe in death when rebirth is a function of design?" Elia shared the resonance of a dreamscape where time was circular and pain was recycled into knowledge. Her truth posed a question. Would you undo suffering if it meant unlearning wisdom? Jared's transmission was different, darker. He showed a vision of Earth submerged, cities empty, not destroyed, but abandoned, as if civilization had transcended into a realm where the body was obsolete, and his voice finally cracked through the static with one chilling sentence. "We were never meant to return as we were." Marilyn staggered slightly, reeling from the infusion of divergent truths, all of which could not coexist without consequence, and as she opened her eyes, her irises briefly flickered with code before stabilizing. "We're not unified," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're splintered, and some of us believe humanity is still a failed experiment." At this, Agent Cole stepped forward, face pale, sweat beading along his collar. "Are you saying they're coming back to destroy us?" But Marilyn shook her head slowly. "Not destroy, convert, rewrite, recalibrate. The worst of them see human emotion as a virus, a glitch in the code of progress." Reggie, barely holding it together, shouted, "Then what the hell do we do? Let them rewrite us?" Marilyn turned to face him, and this time her voice carried the weight of something cosmic. "No, we prove we're worth the contradiction. We protect what they forgot. Empathy, instinct, chaos, music, love, all the things that can't be quantified but define us." The node pulsed again, and from its surface rose a crystalline interface, an activation map detailing the coordinates of all remaining architect nodes across the world, each now glowing with unstable frequencies as if awakening from a coma into panic. "If we don't synchronize them by the solstice," she said, "they'll either collapse or trigger assimilation protocols, and Earth won't survive either outcome. Doctor." Heller scanned the data and gasped. "That's 18 days from now, and some of these locations are inaccessible without orbital entry." Marilyn looked at the sky, where a shadow still lingered behind cloud cover, and simply said, "Then we don't go alone." From the canyon's edge, a low hum vibrated the air, and then they appeared. Ships not of earthly design, organic yet angular, shaped like wings frozen mid-beat, descending not with fire but silence. 3 of them, 1 for each ground team, and beside them walked the Eva series, no longer just observers but full emissaries, each carrying genetic memory cores to guide the journeys. Jared stepped forward again, still clutching the photo from 1999, and looked at Marilyn. "Then let's finish what we started," he said quietly, and she nodded. But deep in her gut, she felt the splinter growing, a fracture in her connection to Jared's other self, the one broadcasting from orbit, the one who had stopped responding just before the node activated, the one who might no longer be the Jared they once knew. As the team prepared to board the first vessel, Marilyn whispered to herself a single phrase she hadn't dared speak in 19 years. Redwater was never a location. It was the name of the program. The ship ascended without sound, lifting them out of Redwater Canyon, in a motion so smooth it defied gravity and logic. Not like any aircraft Marilyn had ever studied or imagined. The interior wasn't metal, but something soft, organic, humming in resonance with their heartbeats, adjusting pressure in real time, as if the ship were alive and listening, learning. No windows, only a translucent wall that projected the landscape below as a 3-dimensional rendering with overlays of electromagnetic fields, atmospheric pressure shifts, and encrypted glyphs that flowed like rivers of meaning none of them could interpret. None, except Marilyn, whose eyes had begun to track the shifting data subconsciously, her brain recalibrating itself faster than any system on board. Reggie clutched the edge of the seat beside her, whispering a nervous prayer, while Dr. Heller murmured into a recorder, "There is no propulsion. It's as if space itself is folding around us. Then came the flash. A sudden drop in temperature, pressure, time, before everything around them went white, not from light but absence. And when color returned, they were no longer in Earth's atmosphere. Above them floated the station, black as void, cloaked in shadows yet unmistakably structured, symmetrical yet fractured, like a cathedral built by something that once understood beauty but had forgotten purpose. Jared's signal had originated from here, the ghosted orbit, a classified platform lost from Earth's grid after 2001, believed destroyed in a solar flare, but now clearly operational, and clearly changed. "It's broadcasting an invitation," Marilyn said, her voice low, the words forming before she knew what they meant. "It wants me inside." The ship docked itself automatically, no mechanical latch, just a merging of material, skin to skin, and the door dissolved like breath on glass. The air inside the station was breathable but stale, and the halls stretched in impossible geometries, as if built for beings who walked time as easily as space. Red lights pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat too close to death. They found Jared in a chamber surrounded by projection strands. He stood perfectly still, eyes closed, floating 3 feet off the ground, tethered to the core by threads of memory, his face serene and utterly unreadable. "Jared!" Reggie shouted, rushing forward, but Marilyn blocked him with one hand, her eyes fixed on the strands, because she could see it now, see what the others couldn't. Jared wasn't in a coma. He was navigating an archive, his consciousness split across millions of recorded timelines, each one a possibility the architects had simulated, evaluated, rejected, or stored. And when his eyes snapped open, the chamber shuddered. "You came," he said. But it was not a question, and his voice was layered, overlapping, like multiple Jareds speaking through one vessel. "Which Jared are you?" Marilyn asked, stepping forward slowly. "The one I lost, or the one I feared we'd become?" His smile was tragic and brief. "Both," he said, "and neither. The version of me you knew didn't survive the node intact. But I remember you, and that means I remember why we fought." Around them, the strands flickered faster, and the walls began to shift, showing simulations. Cities falling, oceans boiling, skies filled with drones. Not war, but transition. "The assimilation protocol, Doctor," Heller breathed. "This is what they are planning if we fail the synchronization test." Jared nodded. "They've judged Earth unstable, emotionally erratic, biologically inefficient. But you, Marilyn, you fractured the node's algorithm. You introduced chaos into the calibration process, and now the system is unsure. It's asking for proof." "What kind of proof?" Reggie asked, but Jared looked only at Marilyn. "It wants you to choose. Humanity's future cannot be determined by collective consensus anymore. We've reached the divergence point, and only the fragment that broke the sequence can submit the override." Marilyn trembled, not from fear, but from weight. How do you choose for an entire species? How do you validate contradiction as a form of worth? The station's walls reshaped into a chamber of trials, 5 doors formed from shifting equations, each one labeled not with words, but emotions. Grief, curiosity, anger, sacrifice, and love. She turned to the team, breathless. "They're not threats, they're simulations. We have to enter them to convince the architects our spectrum of emotion isn't a flaw. It's a survival mechanism." And so they stepped through, 1 door per person, each swallowed by their chosen truth. Marilyn chose love, and as the door accepted her, she was pulled into a world not unlike Earth, but cracked with memory, filled with echoes of people she'd once loved and failed, starting with her younger sister, who had vanished in 1996 and whose face now smiled from a child's body sitting in a meadow untouched by time, asking, "If you had known I'd disappear, would you still have gone to Redwater?" She broke, then rebuilt, then screamed her answer into the void. Yes, because love isn't about knowing the ending, it's choosing to feel anyway. Madon, and as the world around her shattered like glass, a pulse emitted from her chest, flowing through the system, hitting the archive like a wave, destabilizing the simulations. The other doors opened, the others staggered out, bruised, shaken, reborn, and the chamber lit green. Jared lowered from the tether, eyes clearing, voice no longer layered, but fully his. "You did it," he whispered, and then the ceiling above opened, revealing Earth below, still spinning, still flawed, still beautiful. "We have 7 days to synchronize the other nodes," Marilyn said quietly, "and no one back home knows what's coming." Jared took her hand, the contact human, real, terrifying, and together they stepped back into the ship, carrying with them not certainty but hope. The return to Earth was not a descent, but a recalibration of frequency. One moment the ship hovered in the void of the station's outer ring, and the next it slid seamlessly into Earth's upper atmosphere, bypassing radar, satellites, and defense protocols, as if slipping between the raindrops of human surveillance. They landed not at any official base, but an abandoned observatory in Black Rock, Nevada, chosen for its isolation and forgotten by most modern maps. A place once used during the Cold War to monitor celestial anomalies and long since gutted by budget cuts and desert winds. It was there the ghosted orbit's node aligned itself with the Earth's electromagnetic signature, initiating a countdown sequence embedded deep within the station's systems. 7 days until the architects would make contact again. This time not to question, but to judge. 7 days, Jared murmured, reading the cascading data pouring from the ship's internal monitor. That's all we've bought. Time? Not mercy. Marilyn paced the cracked floor of the observatory, her hands shaking though her voice remained steady. We don't need mercy. We need transmission power, access to global communication arrays, and at least one live broadcast capable of reaching every major continent. Reggie looked up from the equipment he was reassembling, with Dr. Heller, sweat pouring down his temples despite the cool air. You want to tell the world? No, Marilyn said, her gaze sharp. I want to prove to the architects that even divided, humanity can still unify under truth, but it has to come from us, not them. They worked in shifts, sleeping in short bursts, living off rations and desert heat, while overhead the sky darkened unnaturally as atmospheric anomalies began manifesting, auroras over Arizona, static waves causing electrical failures in Los Angeles, birds migrating in spiral formations over the Atlantic, all signs the other nodes were awakening. On the third day, a rogue military unit arrived, black-clad, unmarked, moving like wraiths across the sand, led by a woman named Captain Sarin, who did not flinch when the ship unfolded itself in front of her, nor when Jared's retinal pattern activated the biolock. We've been watching this desert since 2002, she said quietly, eyes on Marilyn. We always knew something had gone to sleep here. We didn't expect it to wake up with a message. Marilyn handed her a tablet, displaying the simulation records retrieved from the ghosted orbit. You were right, she said, but this is bigger than any military operation. It's a referendum on us as a species. Sarin said nothing for a long moment, then tapped her earpiece and called off the perimeter lockdown. You'll have your broadcast, she said, but the second this turns hostile, I pull the plug. On the 5th day, the team coordinated with a defunct satellite array in Greenland, bypassing security via Marilyn's deep code implant seeded during the 1999 trauma, something even she hadn't known existed until the ghosted orbit reactivated it. With full signal control, they prepared the message. Not a warning, not a plea, but an invitation for the world to submit one honest, unfiltered response to the question the architects posed. What makes your species worthy of preservation? Marilyn recorded the primary transmission, her standing beside Jared, both silhouetted against the rising sun, their voices woven into a single truth. We are fractured, chaotic, and often cruel. But in our brokenness, we choose to love. We choose to build. We choose to hope. If that is not evolution, then nothing ever was. The message was released on the 6th day, bouncing across continents, intercepted by journalists, hackers, even school children, who began sending back their own responses, drawings, poems, code, silence, all feeding into the architect's now open stream. On the 7th morning, the sky cracked. Not lightning, but sound, pure, resonant, harmonic, spreading across the ionosphere in waves that made whales breach and children laugh in their sleep. Above Nevada, the ghosted orbit reappeared, not cloaked, not silent, but humming in radiant synchronization with Earth's electromagnetic field. They're listening, Jared whispered, stepping outside the observatory as dust curled around his boots. They've seen our chaos, Marilyn said, joining him. Now we show them our fire. The final test had begun. Not in a lab, not in war, but in the frequency of every living being willing to declare, I am here and I am enough. The final synchronization didn't begin with a countdown or an explosion, but with stillness. an absolute bone-deep silence that fell over the desert at precisely 11:11 a.m. on the seventh day. The birds stopped moving, the wind held its breath, and the sensors scattered throughout the observatory blinked into unreadable stasis, as if Earth herself paused, uncertain whether to surrender or transform. The ghosted orbit hovered just above the horizon, low enough now that its massive cathedral-like structure could be seen by the naked eye from neighboring towns, though no one dared approach it. Around the world, the architect nodes had aligned, emitting the same harmonic signal captured from Nevada, but modulating it based on the human transmissions received from across the globe. Millions of voices layered into a single, kaleidoscopic frequency that pulsed with grief and rage and joy and sacrifice. Marilyn stood at the transmitter interface, her hand resting on the final sequence key, a pressure pad that, when activated, would bind their message irreversibly into the architect system's core logic and force a decision. "If I press this," she whispered, more to herself than the others, "it becomes canon. They either accept our emotional algorithm as part of the evolved pattern, or they erase it." Jared stood beside her, the marks on his neck, residue from his earlier tethering to the orbit, glowing faintly like the edges of a fading star. "They won't erase us," he said, "because they didn't bring us back just to witness an execution. They brought us back to make the final argument." Outside, the air began to shimmer, waves of heat and light blending into geometric patterns no eye could follow, fractals that formed not with logic but emotion, bursts of memory and vision, an old man kissing his dying wife's hand, a child lighting a candle for her absent father, a stranger sharing half a sandwich with a homeless teenager. It was not data, it was humanity's soul mapped through feeling, and the orbit began to respond, its base unfurling like a lotus, petals of black alloy rising and rotating, revealing a central core, shaped not like a machine, but like a heart, pulsing, receptive, vulnerable. "They're mirroring us, Doctor," Heller said from behind the instruments. "The node is translating our emotional blueprint into a syntactic logic they can process. What we feel, they now begin to understand." Marilyn's fingers hovered over the pad, her voice trembling. "But do they believe in it?" Suddenly the air split. A bolt of energy cracked the sky above the observatory and struck the ground 10 meters away, revealing a shape, tall, bipedal, not quite human, not quite alien, a construct of memory and possibility, formed from the residual timelines Jared had once navigated. It stepped forward, and in a voice that sounded like thunder and lullabies, it spoke. "Marilyn Chase, Jared Lang, Reggie Voss, Dr. Amelia Heller, you are the chosen fragments. The algorithm now recognizes anomaly through affection. Your pain has created a subroutine. Your hope has written a code we cannot delete. But one variable remains: sacrifice." Marilyn blinked, unsure. "What kind of sacrifice?" The being turned its gaze to Jared, who inhaled sharply as the threads on his skin ignited with light. "He is still partially tethered," the entity said. "His consciousness is dual, part architect, part Earth. Only full reintegration can complete the synchronization." Jared looked at Marilyn then, eyes wide, mouth trembling, and for a moment, time slowed again. "If I stay," he said quietly, "they gain empathy, they gain proof we can coexist, that our chaos has rhythm, but I won't be me anymore." "You can't," she whispered, stepping toward him, tears brimming. "You just got back. You just got back to me." But Jared smiled, the kind of smile only someone who's already made peace with the stars can offer. "I never left," he said. "They only paused me." Then, without another word, he stepped toward the being, and the light consumed him. Not painfully, not violently, but gently, like a homecoming. The being pulsed once more, then vanished. The sky cleared, the static ended, and the ghosted orbit folded itself into a single beam of white light that shot toward the upper atmosphere and vanished forever. Silence returned. Except this time, it wasn't empty. It was sacred. The sensors rebooted. The countdown stopped, and on every device tuned to the harmonic frequency, one message echoed in every language, across every ocean, every divide. Synchronization complete, chaos accepted, evolution achieved. Marilyn dropped to her knees, the pressure pad still untouched, because it no longer mattered. Earth had spoken, and for once, something greater had listened. The desert never looked the same again. Even though the sky returned to its muted blues and the winds carried only dust instead of data, something fundamental had shifted, not just in the particles of air or the soil beneath Marilyn's boots, but in the collective resonance of Earth itself. It wasn't about what was seen. It was what was felt. A subtle thrum beneath reality's surface, like the lingering echo of a song that changed you forever, but you couldn't quite hum. After the final synchronization, the world resumed. But it wasn't the world they'd left behind in 1999, nor the fractured one of 2018. It was something in between, reshaped by understanding, tempered by loss, glowing with the faint light of possible futures. Governments tried to reassert order, of course, but the data leak from the ghosted orbit had already seeded itself into global consciousness. Videos of the synchronization went viral within hours, accompanied by personal messages from people across the globe who had experienced similar pulses, flashes of insight, dreams that weren't quite dreams. A child in Nairobi painted the exact shape of the architect node without ever seeing it. An elderly woman in Detroit heard Jared's final words in her sleep and woke up crying, claiming she once taught a boy with his eyes. The afterlight, this strange, inexplicable resonance, began surfacing everywhere, not as hysteria, but as clarity. People reported remembering moments that weren't theirs, decisions they never made but somehow felt responsible for. Marilyn, now the reluctant center of the phenomenon, refused interviews, declined podiums, and spent her days back in New York at the very rooftop where she had first seen the ghost of the orbit in 1999. It was Reggie who broke the silence first, appearing on a decentralized live stream, no makeup, no prepared statements, just truth. "We didn't solve everything," he said. "Hell, we didn't even understand everything, but something out there heard us, and instead of destroying us, they gave us the chance to destroy our own worst patterns first. I don't know what we're supposed to do next, but I know it has to begin with listening, to ourselves, to each other, to whatever that light left behind." And people did listen. Across cities and countries, art installations sprang up, showing fragments of the final synchronization. Pulses of harmonic sound that caused strangers to cry in unison. Kinetic sculptures powered not by electricity but by collective movement. Street poetry that rewrote itself based on ambient emotion. They called it the Jared Wave, a frequency embedded in the human collective field that could only be activated through vulnerability. Scientists dismissed it as psychosocial mirroring at first, until a blind woman in Kyoto began accurately predicting global seismic activity 3 days before it happened. Citing the hum in my teeth as her only tool, Marilyn stayed silent through all of it, visiting Dr. Heller and Reggie in person only once, to pass them a notebook Jared had written during the 7-day window. In it, he had described not fear, not regret, but awe. "We are the collision of patterns and feeling," he'd scrawled. "The only species arrogant enough to name the stars and terrified enough to wish on them. We are their best question." On the eve of the 20th anniversary of the disappearance, the night of December 31st, 2018, the sky shimmered again, not violently, not publicly, but in a quiet dance of green and gold over black rock. Marilyn stood alone in the same spot where she'd last seen him, a small communicator unit in her hand, modified but dormant, and then it pulsed. Once, twice, like a heartbeat in her palm. No voice came through, no signal traceable, but she knew. He was still tethered, not lost, not erased, just in orbit. Not the kind that circled planets, but the one that looped through love, memory, time, the deepest human current that no architect, no machine, no cosmic intelligence could ever predict. She smiled through tears and whispered into the dark. "We're still building, Jared, brick by brick, moment by moment. We're still here." And somewhere, far beyond human eyes, something shimmered in return. Not a message, not a command, but acknowledgement. Earth had spoken, and now it was learning to listen to itself. In the months that followed, a new discipline emerged. Not science, not art, but something in between. A hybrid field people began calling empathic cartography, the mapping of memory not as static recollection, but as living, reactive energy capable of affecting space, behavior, even weather in microbursts. Satellites around Earth began detecting low-frequency pulses from specific human gatherings, funerals, protests, concerts, events where emotional intensity peaked beyond measurable norms. bending particles in ways quantum models couldn't explain. Scholars tried to study it, but the data refused to behave. One physicist famously said, "It's like trying to measure gravity using a kiss." The turning point came when a young coder named Elena Voss, Reggie's niece, who had been 6 when the band disappeared, released an open-source interface that allowed users to upload deeply emotional memories and transcode them into waveforms, which could then be played as visual light structures in public spaces. She called it the memory code. Installations popped up worldwide, parks where people could sit beneath trees illuminated by the sorrows of others, subway walls shimmering with pulses of joy from weddings half a planet away, entire buildings wrapped in grief-turned glory because people were not ashamed to feel anymore. For once, memory wasn't just archived, it was honored, elevated, re-performed like a sacred symphony. And buried within that code, nested deep inside the emotional harmonics that threaded through every experience, was something that didn't belong to any one person. It was Jared. Not a recording, not a ghost, but an echoing pattern of his final tether, encoded into the architect sequence, duplicated infinitely in every memory code transmission. People who had never heard his name described dreams of stars bleeding light, of a voice that hummed in their spine, guiding them toward forgiveness, toward courage, toward home. Marilyn returned to Nevada on the final anniversary of their disappearance, not as a survivor, not even as a witness, but as the bearer of something sacred, the first full translation of Jared's memory code. She stood before a newly constructed amphitheater near the old observatory, now a monument, and held up a small projector. The crowd gathered in silence. As she pressed play, the sky responded, not with light or thunder, but with stillness again, that same almost holy quiet that preceded their return. And then it began, not in English, not in any spoken dialect, but in pure frequency, a slow-building pulse that vibrated through everyone's sternum like the rhythm of life itself. Images flickered. Jared's childhood laughter, Reggie's fingers strumming his first guitar, the desert wind the day they vanished, the moment he stepped into the architect's core and chose empathy over existence. People cried, not because it was sad, but because it was true, because they knew that somewhere Jared wasn't watching, he wasn't gone, he was inside the code they all now shared, and in the final moment, the pulse dropped into one last note, so low it could only be felt, and the projector dimmed. Silence. Then a child in the crowd, barely 5, stood and said softly, "He's happy now?" No one asked how she knew. They just believed her. The next morning, newspapers didn't talk about a vigil or a concert. They spoke of an alignment of soul vectors, of an earth subtly rewired, softened, made less cruel by the act of remembering together. And Marilyn, when asked what she would do next, simply replied, "We build places where memory heals, not haunts." In time, the ghosted orbit faded into legend, then into myth, but the code remained, pulsing quietly through servers, through signals, through people's hearts. Proof that even in the vast cold of the unknown, the human pulse, flawed, fierce, full of ache, had been the missing piece all along. Some stories end with answers, others leave behind echoes, but this one rewired the silence. What began as a mystery buried in sand became a mirror for the soul of humanity. Flawed, fearless, and still learning how to remember without breaking. As the world continues to pulse with fragments of their journey, one truth remains. We are more connected than we know, and more powerful than we dare to believe, especially when we feel, remember, and grieve. Together. If this story moves something in you, don't let it vanish. Share it. Discuss it. Carry it forward. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary truths are not found in what was lost, but in what we choose to find again.